The rain fell in soft, steady sheets over Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, blurring the runway lights into golden streaks against the tarmac. It was just past 6 a.m., and the terminal hummed with the quiet urgency of early travelers, rolling. Suitcases hushed goodbyes, the occasional yawn swallowed by the cavernous echo of departure gates. Among them moved a woman no one paid much attention to. She wore a charcoal-gray trench coat, its collar turned up against the morning chill, a small duffel slung over one shoulder. Her hair dark, shoulder-length, slightly damp from the rain was, pulled back in a low, practical ponytail. No flashy jewelry. No oversized sunglasses. Just a woman with tired eyes and a boarding pass clutched loosely in her hand. Seat 1 for C, Flight 481 to Albuquerque. Name E. Carter. She moved through security like she'd done it 1,000 times before, because she had. Not as a civilian, but as someone who once walked through military checkpoints with a sidearm on her hip and a call sign stitched onto her flight suit. But that was another life. One she'd buried under layers of silence, routine, and carefully chosen anonymity. Today, she wasn't that person. Today, she was just another passenger. Trying to get across the country without drawing a single glance, she reached Gate B12 with 10 minutes to spare. The flight was nearly full business travelers with laptops open, families corralling restless. Children, a group of college students laughing over shared headphones. She found her seat near the middle of the cabin, tucked her duffel beneath the seat in front, and settled in without a word. The man in 14D gave her a polite nod. She returned it with the faintest tilt of her head, enough to be courteous, not enough to invite conversation. That was the balance she'd mastered over the years. Present but invisible. Outside, the rain had eased to a mist. The aircraft, a Boeing 737, sat bathed in the pale blue glow of dawn, engines already spinning. Up with a low, rhythmic whine. Passengers fastened seatbelts. Overhead bins clicked shut. A flight attendant demonstrated safety procedures with practiced ease. Everything was ordinary. Everything was calm. But for the woman in 14C, calm was never just calm. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the window as the plane taxied toward the runway. Her reflection stared back, pale, composed, unreadable. Yet beneath that stillness ran a current of memory, sharp as a radar lock. She remembered the last time she'd flown into New Mexico, not in a commercial airliner, but in an F-16, low. Over the white sands, trailing smoke from a near miss over the Rio Grande corridor, that mission had cost her 2 friends. It had also earned her a medal she'd never worn. She blinked, and the memory faded. The jet lifted off smoothly, climbing through layers of cloud until the city below vanished beneath a sea of white. Sunlight poured through the window, warm and steady. A child behind her giggled. Someone opened a bag of pretzels. It's normal sounds. It's normal life. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're expecting light turbulence as we cross into Nevada airspace. Nothing to worry about, but please keep your seatbelts fastened for the next hour or so." His tone was calm, professional, but to her ears, it carried a thread of something else, something measured, deliberate. Not fear, not alarm, but awareness. The kind pilots used when they knew more than they were saying. Her fingers tightened. Slightly around her knee, she glanced out the window again. The sky was clear. Too clear. And then, almost as if summoned by her thought, a flicker of movement caught her eye far off to the starboard side. It's just above the cloud line. 2 shapes dot fast. Silent, sleek. They emerged from the glare of the sun like shadows given from angular, predatory, unmistakable. F-35 Lightning Eyes, 5th-generation fighters, painted in low-visibility gray, their edges sharp against the endless blue. They weren't flying random patrol patterns. They were converging. On this plane, a murmur rippled through the cabin. Woman gasped. A teenager in the row ahead pointed and whispered, "Dude, are those fighter jets?" The captain came back on, his voice quieter now, almost apologetic. Folks, we seem to have some unexpected company. Again, nothing to be concerned about. Just remain seated and we'll sort this out shortly." Sort this out. The phrase echoed in her mind. In the Air Force, you didn't sort out. An intercept? You responded, you authenticated. You followed protocol down to the second. And if civilian aircraft were involved, it meant someone somewhere had flagged this flight for a reason. The F-35s drew closer, matching the airliner's speed with eerie precision. One pulled up just off the right wingtip, so close she could. See the canopy? The faint glint of a pilot's helmet inside. The other circled wide, maintaining a protective arc. Her breath hitched just once. Then, through the low hum of the cabin, she heard it. Not over the speakers, not meant for passengers, but faint, crackling through the cockpit radio. Picked up only because she'd spent years listening for exactly this kind of transmission. Air Command, this is Lightning 1, intercepting. Civilian Flight 481, requesting passenger manifest verification, specifically. Call sign Viper 9. Repeat, Viper 9. Is she on board? Silence. Then the captain's voice, barely above a whisper. Tower confirms. Viper 9 is on board. Seat 14C. The name hit her like a gust of wind at 40,000 feet. Viper 9. She hadn't heard it in over a decade, not since the day she'd turned. In her wings, walked away from Langley, and vanished into the quiet anonymity of civilian life. She'd changed her name, deleted her socials, avoided reunions, memorials, even her old squadron's group chats. She'd told herself it was for peace, for closure. But peace, she knew now, was just another kind of waiting. The lead F-35 rolled slightly to the left then. With deliberate slowness, the pilot raised a gloved hand from the throttle and pressed it to the canopy in salute. Not a wave. Not a gesture for show. A salute. A recognition. A debt being honored. Gasps filled the cabin. People turned in their seats, scanning the rows, eyes wide, voices hushed. Who is she? Is she military? Is she in trouble? The man in 14D leaned toward her, eyebrows raised. Are you, like, famous or something? She didn't answer. Just kept her eyes on the fighter jet, her expression unreadable. But inside, a wall she'd spent years building began to crack. Because she knew why they were here. Not for security. Not for protocol. For a promise, 10 years ago, over the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush. A four-ship of F-35s had gone dark during a classified CAS mission. Enemy SAMs. Jamming, 0 comes. Of the 4 pilots, only 2 made it out. She was one. Of them, the other, her wingman, Lieutenant Marcus Cole, had been hit, ejection failed, and went down in hostile territory. She'd disobeyed direct orders, flown back alone through a storm of radar locks and tracer fire, and held station over his crash site for 47 minutes until CSA arrived. Landed 2 hits to her own aircraft, landed on fumes, and carried. Marcus's dog tags in her pocket ever since. He'd survived. Barely. And every year, without fail, on the anniversary of that mission, he visited the memorial wall at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, the very place she was flying to. Today, only this year, he wouldn't be going alone because Marcus had passed away 3 weeks ago. Cancer. Quiet at home, surrounded by family. And in his final letter, handwritten, postmarked the day before he died, he'd asked one thing. If you're still out there, Viper, come say goodbye. Not for me. For us. She hadn't planned to go. Wait. Too many ghosts. But then, 2 days ago, an encrypted message appeared in an old secure channel she hadn't checked in years. Asterisk, they know you're flying. They're watching. They remember. Asterisk, she thought it was a prank. Or nostalgia now. Watching. The F-35s hold formation beside her, a silent escort through a restricted airspace. She understood the Air Force hadn't forgotten. And neither had the pilots who'd grown up. Hearing the legend of Viper 9, the woman who flew into hell and brought her wingman home, the lead jet dipped its wing once. Twice, then held position. Not just flying alongside. Guarding. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. Inside, a single dog tag, scratched and faded, with the name Cole, M. in a service number. She ran her thumb over it. The metal cooled against her skin. Outside, the desert began to appear, vast, sun-baked, endless. New Mexico. She wasn't just E. Carter anymore. She was Viper. 9, and the sky remembered her. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, offering drinks, trying to soothe nervous passengers. But no one looked at the drinks. All eyes were on the windows, on the fighters, on the woman in 14C, who sat perfectly still, as if she'd been carved from the same steel as the jets outside. One elderly woman, 2 rows ahead, turned and met her. Gaze, no words. Just a slow, respectful nod. She returned it. In that moment, the cabin wasn't filled with strangers. It was filled with witnesses. And what they were witnessing wasn't just an escort. It was a homecoming. The captain's voice returned, softer now, almost reverent. Folks, we've been granted priority clearance into Albuquerque. The F-35s will accompany us all the way to final approach. Again, please remain seated, and thank you for your patience. Patience. He almost smiled. Patience wasn't what this was about. This was about legacy, about the unspoken bonds forged in the thin air above war zones, where seconds stretch into. Lifetimes and names become call signs that echo long after the engines go silent. She leaned back, closed her E. The desert air shimmered with heat as Flight 481 began its final descent into Albuquerque International Sunport. Outside the window, the Sandia Mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their pink-hued slopes bathed in the late morning sun. The city below looked peaceful, sprawling neighborhoods, winding roads, the glint of the Rio Grande snaking through the valley. To most passengers, it was just another destination. But to her, it was a threshold. She kept her hands folded in her lap, the dog tag still tucked in her palm, its edges pressing faintly into her skin. Every mile closer to the ground carried her further from the anonymity she'd worn like armor for over a decade. She could feel it slipping away, not with regret, but with the quiet inevitability of a storm finally breaking after years of stillness. The F-35s remained steadfast on either wing, their presence both surreal and deeply familiar. She recognized the discipline in their formation, the precise spacing, the synchronized turns, the way they banked just enough to avoid wake turbulence. These weren't just pilots flying a mission. They were paying homage, and in the language of aviators, that meant everything. A flight attendant paused near her row, offering a bottled water with a hesitant smile. "You okay, ma'am? You've been quiet?" She nodded once. "I'm fine, thank you." No more words were needed. The attendant lingered for just a second longer, eyes flicking toward the window, toward the fighters, then back to Herbie for continuing down the aisle. There was no curiosity in that look. Only respect. That was the thing about military culture. You didn't always need to explain yourself. Sometimes your presence was enough. The plane touched down with a gentle thud, reverse thrusters roaring as it slowed along the runway. But instead of turning toward the terminal, it continued straight past the commercial gates, past baggage claim, all the way to a quiet, fenced-off section of the airfield. A small cluster of people stood near a hangar, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes. Among them, she spotted an Air Force staff Koran standing beside it. An older man in a weathered leather jacket, leaning on a cane, her breath caught. It was General Daniel Reyes, retired, former commander of the 388th Fighter Wing. The man who'd signed her discharge, papers and pinned her captain's bars onto her shoulders after the Hindu Kush mission. She hadn't seen him in person since the day she walked away. As the jet rolled to a stop, the F-35S peeled off in a smooth, coordinated maneuver, one final wing dip before vanishing into the western sky. The cabin remained silent. No one unbuckled their seatbelts. No one reached for overhead bins. They all knew this moment wasn't theirs. The jet bridge extended with a soft hiss. The door opened, and then, as if on cue, the small group on the tarmac came to attention. Not all of them, just the ones in uniform. 3 airmen, 2 NCOs, and a young Captain No, older than 20. It snapped into perfect salute. The civilians placed hands over their hearts. Even the airport ground crew, who'd clearly been briefed, stood straighter, hats removed. She hesitated at the top of the stairs. This wasn't protocol. This was something deeper, something earned. She took a slow breath, adjusted the strap of her duffel, and stepped down. The concrete was warm beneath her boots, real boots, not the loafers she'd worn through security. She'd changed in the lavatory mid-flight, trading civilian comfort for the quiet truth of who she still was. No insignia, no rank, just black flight boots, dark slacks, and the same gray hoodie, but now with purpose. General Reyes stepped forward, his eyes glistening. He didn't salute. Instead, he extended his hand. "Viper 9, he said, voice thick. "You came." She took his hand, firm, brief. "I owed him that much. He talked about you until the end," Reyes said softly. "Said you were the reason he got to see his daughter graduate, the reason he held his granddaughter for the first time." She looked past him. Toward the distant foothills where the memorial stood, a modest stone wall, etched with names of New Mexico's fallen aviators. Marcus's name had been added just last month. "I didn't do it for thanks," she said. "I know," Reyes replied. "That's why we're thanking you anyway." Behind them, the young captain approached, crisp and nervous. "Ma'am, my call sign is Viper 12. I trained on your mission tapes." The Hindu Kush Sar. "It's required study at Nellis." She studied him, the sharp cut of his uniform, the earnestness in his eyes. He was the future. And he knew her past. "You flew it well?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, but I don't think I'd have had the guts to go back alone." She gave the faintest smile. "You don't know that? Courage isn't something you have, it's something you choose, even when you're scared." He nodded, then added, "We escorted your flight because, well, word got around that you were coming. And we all agreed you deserve to come home like a warrior." She looked up at the sky, where the F-35s had vanished. "I'm not a warrior anymore." "Not," Reyes cut in gently, "but you're still one of us." The simple truth of it settled over her like a familiar flight suit worn, but never forgotten. They walked together toward the staff car. As they passed the small crowd, a woman stepped forward, mid-50s, eyes red-rimmed, but steady. "You're her," the woman said. "The one who brought Marcus back." Wasn't a question. She nodded. The woman reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. For people on a porch, Marcus, older now, gray at the temples, arm around a woman. 2 young adults beside them, smiling whole. "He never stopped talking about you," the woman said. "Said you were the bravest person he ever knew. And the quietest." She took the photo, her fingers trembling just slightly. "He was the brave one. He stayed in the fight. I just flew the plane." "No," the woman said firmly. "Chose to go back. That's not just flying, that's love." The word hung in the desert air, heavy and pure. She handed the photo back, then reached into her coat and pulled out Marcus's dog tag. Would you want this? To keep?" With his things, tears welled, but the woman didn't look away. "He kept one of yours, you know, in his desk drawer," said it brought him luck. She hadn't known that. They stood in silence for a long moment. 2 women bound by the ghost of a man who'd lived because someone refused to leave him behind. Finally, Reyes cleared his throat. "We've got a car waiting. The memorial service starts in an hour. Just family, close friends, and you." She nodded. "I'll be there." As they drove away from the tarmac, the city unfolding around them, she stared out the window, watching the world blur past. Her mind drifted back not to the mission itself, but to the days after. The debriefings, the medals she'd refused, the nights she'd sat alone in her quarters, listening to the wind howled across the Nevada desert, wondering if she'd ever feel light again. She'd left the air. Forced not because she didn't love it, but because loving it too much had nearly broken her. Flying wasn't just a job. It was a covenant. And when you lost people under your watch, the weight didn't vanish with the uniform, settled into your bones. But today felt different, because today wasn't about loss. It was about remembrance. and remembrance. She realized wasn't a burden. It was a bridge. The car turned onto a quiet road lined with juniper trees. In the distance, the memorial site came into view, a circular plaza of stone. Flags at half-mast, candles already flickering in the breeze. A few people milled about, placing flowers, adjusting photos. She saw Marcus's family gathered near a new plaque. His wife, his children. His grandson, no older than 6, holding a toy F-35. Her chest tightened. She wasn't sure she belonged here. She hadn't been part of his life after the service. She'd kept her distance, thinking it was better that way for him, for her. For the clean break, both of them needed. But clean breaks weren't always kind. Maybe some ties were meant to remain, even if unseen. The car stopped. Reyes turned to her. "You don't have to go in yet. Take your time." She stepped out, the desert wind tugging at her hair. The sun was high now, casting sharp shadows. She walked slowly toward the memorial, her boots crunching on gravel. As she neared, a hush fell over the small gathering. It's not out of fear or curiosity, but recognition. They knew who she was, not from headlines or newsreels, but from stories passed down over dinner tables and squadron bars and quiet moments between. Old friends, the woman who flew back, the pilot who didn't leave anyone behind. She stopped a few feet from the plaque. Marcus's name was there, etched in clean, bold letters. *LT. Marcus Cole, 1984 to 2025. He had your 6. Below it, a small engraving, and Viper 9 had his. *. She hadn't known they'd add that. A tear slipped down her cheek. And she didn't wipe it away. She reached into her duffel and pulled out a small, folded American flag. It had been in her possession since the day Marcus was rescued. She'd kept it in a drawer untouched, waiting for a moment that never seemed to come. Now, she knelt and placed it gently at the base of the plaque. Then she stood, straightened her shoulders, and rendered a slow, precise salute, not as a civilian, but as Captain Elena Voss, call sign Viper 9, United States Air Force. Retired, the crowd remained silent, respectful, still, and in that silence, she felt the weight lifting. Not gone, but shared. Because legacy wasn't carried alone. It was passed on, honored. Remembered as she turned to walk away, Marcus's daughter approached. "Will you stay for the service?" She hesitated. "I wasn't sure I was invited." "Your family," the daughter said simply. He said so himself. She nodded. "Then I'll stay." They took their seats on simple wooden benches arranged in a semicircle. The chaplain spoke of courage, of service, of the quiet strength found in ordinary people who do extraordinary things. He didn't mention her name. But when he said some heroes never wear capes, they wear wings, she knew. After the service, people lingered. Some approached her, not with fanfare, but with quiet gratitude. A veteran gripped her hand and said, "My son flies F-35s now. He'll know your story." The teenager asked if she'd sign his model jet. She did, writing only, *fly with heart. No one asked for photos. No one demanded details. They understood. Some stories are sacred. Later, as the sun began to dip, behind the sandias, painting the sky in streaks of amber and violet, she found herself alone at the edge of the plaza. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. She thought of the 35 pilots who'd escorted her, young, skilled, carrying the torch forward. She thought of Marcus laughing over coffee in a dusty outpost, saying, "If I go down, Viper, don't you dare leave me." She thought of herself years ago, sitting in a cockpit with fuel, low and missiles inbound, choosing to turn back, not because it was smart, but because it was right. She realized she hadn't come here to say goodbye. She'd come to say, "Thank you. Thank you for the friendship. Thank you for the trust. Thank you for reminding her that courage isn't loud, it's steady. It's showing up even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching." As dusk settled, the first stars blinked to life overhead. She looked up, as she always did. searching for the familiar constellations pilots used to navigate before GPS. Orion, Cassiopeia, the North Star. And in that moment, she felt it again, the sky calling her home, not to war, to duty, but to peace, real peace. The kind that comes not from forgetting, but from honoring. She turned to leave, but paused when she saw the staff car waiting. Reyes stood beside it, hands in his pockets. "Going back to Seattle tonight?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not yet. I think I'll stay a few days, visit the museum, walk the trails. Remember." He smiled. "Good. The desert has a way of healing souls." They drove back in comfortable silence. The city lights grew brighter, but her mind remained in the quiet of the memorial, in the weight of the salute, in the unspoken bond between those who serve and those who remember. Back at her Hotel Modest, near the base gate, she unpacked her duffel. Only a few items: a change of clothes, a book of poetry, and a small framed photo she kept hidden in a side pocket. It showed her, Marcus, and two others smiling on a tarmac, helmets off, arms around each other. Only two were left now. She placed it on the nightstand, then she sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the endless New Mexico sky. Tomorrow she'd visit the Air Force Museum. Maybe speak to a few cadets if asked, not as a legend, but as someone who made choices, some right, some wrong, all human. And then, eventually, she'd return to her quiet life. But she wouldn't hide anymore, because being seen wasn't weakness. It was witness. And the world needed more witnesses to goodness, to loyalty, to quiet heroism that asks for nothing in return. She turned off the light. The room filled with shadows, but outside the stars burned bright. Somewhere, an F-35 roared overhead on a training run. She smiled. The sky was still hers, and she was still it. If you liked the video, be sure to like it. Be sure to write your opinion in the comments at the end of the video. Morning in Albuquerque arrived not with fanfare, but with softness, the kind of light that slips through cottonwood leaves and paints the desert in gold. She woke before dawn, as she always had, drawn not by alarm clocks, but by the quiet rhythm of the sky. Outside her window, the Sandia Mountains stood in silhouette, ancient and unmoved, as if they'd been watching long before she arrived, and would keep watch long after she left. She made coffee in the small hotel kitchenette, the rich aroma mingling with the dry scent of sage drifting through the cracked window. No rush, no agenda. It's the stillness she'd forgotten she needed. Yesterday had been heavy with memory. Today, she hoped, would be light with meaning. She dressed simply khaki. Pants, a navy pullover, her boots. No disguise, no pretense. Just herself. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. After breakfast, she walked the half-mile to the National Museum of Nuclear Science and History. Not for the exhibits on weapons or war, but for the outdoor air parka, quiet tribute to aviation pioneers, test pilots, and the quiet innovators who shaped flight not for glory, but for progress. There, beneath a wide New Mexico sky, stood a restored F-16 painted in desert camo. Call sign faded but still visible, Viper 9. She stopped dead in her tracks. She hadn't known it was here. The aircraft wasn't her Snowtail. Number matched, but it was a sister ship. From the same era, same squadron, patch stenciled near the cockpit. Someone had placed a small wreath of red poppies on the nose. Beneath it, a handwritten note. Asterisk for the ones who flew when others turned away. Asterisk, she stood before it for a long time, not touching it, just breathing in the presence of something that once carried her soul through fire. A museum docent approached an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes.
Ow.
You recognize her, don't you? She nodded. Flew one just like her. He smiled. We get a lot of veterans here. Most don't say much, but they always pause at this one. Why this jet? She asked. Because he said gently, it's not labeled for its weapons or its speed. It's labeled for its pilot. Anonymous, but honored. That's rare. She looked at the jet again. Not as a weapon, not as a machine, but as a vessel. Of choice of sacrifice, yes, but also of loyalty. Her name wasn't on the fuselage, she said softly. Just the call sign. And that was enough, the docent replied. Because in the sky, names fade, call signs echo. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her alone with the ghost of her past. She didn't cry, but she did place a hand on the cool metal of the wingtip just once. A silent thank you. From there, she wandered into the museum's Hall of Honor. Long corridor lined with portraits of New Mexico's military heroes. Not generals or politicians, teachers, nurses, mechanics, pilots, ordinary people who did extraordinary things when called. And there, near the end of the hall, framed in simple black wood, was a photo of Marcus Coles, miling in flight suit, helmet under arm. Beneath it, *LT. Marcus Cole, F-35 pilot, 388th Fighter Wing. He believed in coming back for his own. She stood before it, arms crossed, just as she'd stood on 1,000 tarmacs beside him. I came back, she whispered. The words weren't for the museum. They were for him, for herself, for the promise kept. She stayed until the sun climbed high, then turned to leave. But as she passed the gift shop, something caught her eye: a display of call sign patches. Not replicas, originals, donated by veterans or families, and they're pinned proudly in the center. Viper 9. She froze. It was her patch. The exact design black background. Silver Viper coiled around a lightning bolt, red eyes gleaming. She hadn't seen it since she'd packed it away in a box labeled "Do Not Open." How? She asked the shop attendant, a young woman, with an Air Force ROTC pin on her lapel. It was donated anonymously last year, the attendant said, with a note that said, for the museum. For the truth, we don't know who sent it. But we display it every May, Marcus Cole's birthday. Stared at the patch, not as a relic, but as a message. Someone remembered. Someone honored. Someone kept the story alive, not for fame, but for faith. Faith in people like her. People like Marcus. People who chose to turn back when it would have been easier to fly on. She bought a postcard from the shop blank. Simple and wrote on the back. The sky remembers those who fly with heart. She left it on the display case beneath the patch. Then she stepped back into the sunlight, lighter than she'd felt in years. That afternoon, she returned to the Memorial Plaza. Fewer people now, just a groundskeeper tending the flowers, a couple sitting on a bench, holding hands. Walked to Marcus's plaque and sat on the stone rim surrounding it. She didn't speak, just listened to the wind, to the distant hum of jets from Kirtland, to the silence between heartbeats. And in that silence, she made a decision. She wouldn't vanish again, not fully. She'd spent so long believing that leaving the Air Force meant leaving behind everything, the camaraderie, the purpose, the identity. But today, she understood, service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It evolves. You serve by remembering, by showing up, by telling stories that inspire without sensationalizing, by honoring the fallen without fetishizing the fight, and maybe, just maybe, by letting others see that heroes aren't born in fire. They're forged in choices, made in quiet moments when no one is watching. As evening approached, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, but the signature gave it away. Lightning 1. 388th FW. It read, "Ma'am, hope you don't mind. We told the squadron you were here." Not to bother you, just so they know. The legend is real, and she's still one of us. Safe travels, Viper 9. Asterisk, she smiled. Not a wide smile, but a true one. She typed back, asterisk, fly safe. Keep their 6. Asterisk, she didn't sign it. She didn't need to. Later, at sunset, she walked the trails behind the memorial, where wildflowers bloomed in bursts of purple and yellow. The sky turned from blue to rose to deep indigo. The first stars appeared one by one, like old friends returning. She thought of the passengers on Flight 481, the child who pointed at the jets, the man who asked, "Who are you?" of the elderly, woman who nodded in silent understanding. They'd witnessed something rare, not a spectacle, but a covenant. The unspoken promise between those who serve and those who carry their memory forward. And in that moment, she realized she hadn't been recognized for what she'd done in combat. She'd been honored for who she'd chosen to be afterward. Loyal, quiet, faithful. To a promise that was the real legacy, not medals, not missions. But the refusal to let love end when the mission does. As night fell, she returned to her hotel. She packed her duffel slowly, thoughtfully. The dog tag she'd carried, she left it on the nightstand with a note for housekeeping. Asterisk, please place this at Marcus Cole's memorial. It belongs there. Asterisk, she kept only the photograph, the 4 of them on the tarmac. Young and unbroken. Because memory isn't about holding on. It's about carrying forward the next morning. She checked out before sunrise. The drive to the airport was quiet. At the terminal, she stopped at a small cafe and bought 2 coffees hers, and one for the gate agent who'd helped her the day before. "You're leaving already?" Agent asked, surprised. "Gotta?" "Flight home," she said. "Seattle, back to whatever E. Carter does." She smiled, back to life. But not as E. Carter. The agent studied, hurriedly looked at her for the first time. "Then who are you?" She glanced out the window where a Southwest jet taxied past. "Someone who remembers." She handed over the second coffee. "Thanks for seeing me." With that, she walked toward security. This time, she didn't hide. She wore her boots. She carried her duffel openly. She met the eyes of those she passed, not with pride, but with presence at the gate. She found her seat, one to a window, aisle 2. The left, familiar, the plane filled. Engines hummed. The captain announced departure, and as they lifted off, climbing above the desert she'd come to see, she looked out and saw, not emptiness, but connection. The land below held stories. The sky above held promises. And she held both. Hours later, over the Pacific Northwest, rain pattered against the window. Seattle emerged through the clouds, gray, green, alive, as the plane descended. She closed her eyes and remembered Marcus's voice one last time. Asterisk, if you ever doubt you mattered, Viper, look up. The sky will remind you. Asterisk, she did. And it did. Back home, she unpacked. She placed the photograph on her bookshelf, not hidden, not displayed like a trophy, but simply there, part of her story. That evening, she sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the rain. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from the Air Force Historical Foundation. They'd heard she was in Albuquerque. Would she consider sharing her story for their oral history archive? Not as a combat account, but as a reflection on loyalty, legacy, and the human side of service. She typed a reply, asterisk yes, but only if it's about him. Not me, asterisk. She hit send. Then she leaned back, watching the rain fall through the trees. She wasn't E. Carter. She wasn't just Viper 9. She was both and neither. She was simply herself, and that at last was enough. In the days that followed, life returned to its steady rhythm: grocery runs, quiet walks, books read in the afternoon light. But something had shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but deeply. She no longer flinched at the sound of jets overhead. She no longer avoided reunions or memorials. She even signed up to volunteer at a local youth aviation program, teaching kids not how to fly fighters, but how to read the sky, respect the craft, Understand that courage often looks like quiet responsibility. One afternoon, a young girl asked her, "Were you ever scared up there?" She thought for a moment. All the time. But fear doesn't mean you stop. It means you care enough to keep going. The girl nodded, wide-eyed. "I want to be brave like that." "You already are," she said. Bravery starts the moment you choose to show up. And in that exchange, she saw the future, not in machines or missions, but in hearts willing to serve, protect, and remember. Weeks turned to months. Spring arrived in Seattle with cherry blossoms and longer days. In one clear morning, as she walked through a park near Lake Union, she heard a familiar sound. High above, she looked up. 2 F-35s flew in formation, distant but unmistakable, heading east toward Joint Base. Lewis-McCord. They weren't escorting anyone. They weren't on intercept. They were just flying. And yet, as they passed overhead, one of them, just for a second, tilted its wing. Not enough for civilians to notice, but enough for her. A silent acknowledgement. A sky-to-ground salute. A reminder. Asterisk. We see you. We remember. Asterisk. She stopped walking, looked up, and smiled. Because the sky doesn't forget its own, and neither do those who fly beneath it with. Honor. Her story wasn't about war. It wasn't about glory. It was about a promise kept in silence. A name spoken in reverence, and a call sign that meant more than rank. It meant loyalty. And in a world that often celebrates noise, her legacy was this. True heroism is quiet. It shows up, it stays, and it never leaves anyone behind. So the next time you're on a flight, and you see fighter jets streaking past your window, don't just wonder who they're escorting. Wonder who they're honoring, because sometimes the most extraordinary people sit quietly in seat 1 for C, wearing no medals, carrying no fanfare, just a promise, a past, and a call sign the sky will never forget. And if you ever see her, the woman with the calm eyes and the steady hands, don't ask who she is, just nod, like the elderly passenger did, like the ground crew did, like the sky itself does, because some stories aren't meant to be told loudly. They're meant to be lived and remembered, with respect, with gratitude, and with the quiet understanding that the greatest heroes don't seek recognition. Simply do what's right, long after the world stops watching.